So Frank Lloyd Wright is considered to be one of the best and most influential architects that has ever lived. His spaces used organic architecture, they were very innovative and forward-thinking, and a good number of his projects were built with both sustainability and affordability in mind. The house that you see behind me is one of Wright's most famous works that still stands to this day. This one is called the David and Gladys Wright House. It's a residence in Phoenix, Arizona, named after Frank Lloyd Wright's son and daughter-in-law, who he built the house for back in 1952. This house is definitely an example of one of Wright's more unusual homes, and thankfully one that just landed on the National Register of Historic Places earlier this year. In today's episode, we aren't going to spend our time talking about the David and Gladys Wright House though, even though it is awesome. We're instead going to shift our focus to a home designed by Frank Lloyd Wright sitting in the Laurel Highlands of southern Pennsylvania. It's a home that definitely falls on the list of one of the most famous houses in the world, and a home that the Smithsonian listed as one of the top 28 places that you must see before you die, right along with the Grand Canyon, the Taj Mahal, the Louvre, and Machu Picchu. If you're a lover of architecture, or if you just read the title of this video, you know that we're here to talk about the modern 1935 built home by Frank Lloyd Wright, famously known as Fallingwater.
From the beginning, Fallingwater was a showstopper.
I'd like to have architecture that belonged where you see it standing, and was a grace to the landscape instead of a disgrace.
Frank Lloyd Wright saw this natural rock, saw this creek, and built a house for the ages.
And the letters we receive from our clients tell us how those buildings we built for them have changed the character of their whole life and our whole existence.
Now, before we dive into this awesome house in Pennsylvania, let's first talk a little bit about the history of Frank Lloyd Wright and how this house fit into his career. Wright was born in a small town in Richland Center, Wisconsin back in 1867, although he moved around a lot as a kid until he and his family ultimately settled in Madison, Wisconsin, about 60 miles east of where he was born. His mother really wanted him to be an architect when he grew up. Apparently, she actually hung up pictures of cool buildings and cathedrals in his nursery after he was born.
My mother was a teacher, and she wanted an architect for his son. I happened to be the son. I was conditioned by her. The room into which I was born was hung with the wood engravings of the English cathedrals made by Timothy Cole. Do you remember those? So I was born into architecture.
I guess that rubbed off on Frank Lloyd Wright because he dropped out of college at the age of 19 and moved out to Chicago to pursue a career in architecture, where he quickly found work, and only after about 5 years, he ended up opening his own office. Even though Frank Lloyd Wright started as an architect at a very young age, he didn't pick up his first independent commission until about 5 years later at the age of 27. This was when he was commissioned to design a house called the Winslow House at 515 Auburn Place in River Forest, Illinois, back in 1894. Wright's style of architecture was very forward-thinking at the time, and he was most known for all of the prairie style of homes that he designed in the early 1900s, which were inspired by the flat landscape of the Midwest. So these homes often had big horizontal masses and pretty open interiors with limited walls breaking up the rooms inside. Wright didn't have an influence just on the architecture of the homes that he designed. He also had a pretty heavy influence on those interiors as well, including the furnishings, which is pretty unusual for an architect. He was quoted saying that the mission of an architect is to help people understand how to make life more beautiful, the world a better one for living in, and to give reason, rhyme, and meaning to life. Frank Lloyd Wright designed over 1,100 buildings over the course of his lifetime, and through the 1920s, he continued to take on commissions all over the country, which made him more and more well-known as the years went by. With each one of these decades that passed, his style became more progressive and more modern too, with a big chapter of his life focused on this Usonian style of home, which was meant to give the middle-income families the opportunity to live in progressive modern homes. One thing that always challenged Wright is he had a ton of drama in his personal life. Just one example is his second of 3 wives was actually murdered in 1914. And following the Depression coming into the 1930s, Wright was still respected, but he was looked at as an architect who'd kind of come and gone, or maybe left his prime. That perception of Wright didn't last all that long though, because he took the world by surprise with Fallingwater. The story of how Fallingwater came to be started with the Kauffman family, who were the owners of the Kauffman department store out of Pittsburgh. The Kauffmans were very well-to-do, with a family fortune worth tens of millions of dollars, which would be hundreds of millions in today's dollars. But even though they liked to work hard during the week, on the weekends they liked to escape to hike, ride horses, and just hang out in nature. The couple had already owned a cabin out in the Bear Run region where the Fallingwater house would eventually be built. And when that cabin started to fall apart, they ended up calling on Frank Lloyd Wright to help them design their new weekend home out there. Frank Lloyd Wright was 67 years old when he was given the opportunity to design this home for the Kauffman family, and with him having such a focus on modern and organic architecture, this project fit right within his wheelhouse. Wright first visited the site on December 18th, 1934, and he famously didn't start drawing the Fallingwater house until 9 months later on September 22nd, 1935. See, on that September 22nd date, I guess Edgar Kauffman called Frank Lloyd Wright out of the blue, and he said he happened to be in Milwaukee where Frank Lloyd Wright worked, and he just wanted to meet him while he was out there to check out the progress of the Fallingwater drawings. This kind of threw Frank Lloyd Wright into a panic because I guess he had told the Kauffman family that he had been working on the project for the past 9 months, but he never actually put pen to paper. The 2 hours that it took Edgar Kauffman to drive to Wright's office, Wright feverishly drew out some preliminary sketches and floor plans of the Fallingwater home. He just did it over the map of the site, which at the time, of course, was riddled with boulders, ledges, and a waterfall. We'll get into the specs on the house here in a minute, but first I'll say that Kauffman's initial impression of Wright's work on this house was generally positive, except he did have some critiques because he and his wife wanted the house to be in a position where they had a view of the waterfall, so he didn't understand why Frank Lloyd Wright drew it with the house literally on top of the waterfall. To this critique, Wright responded simply with, "I want you to live with the waterfall," which is why he had the home designed in a way where the stream and the waterfall would literally flow right through the base of the house, with cantilevered terraces shooting out in every direction over the water. The Kauffman family and Frank Lloyd Wright eventually all ended up on the same page. The drawings were finalized and construction started in March of 1936, and the home finished construction by 1938. This home ended up being a weekend retreat for the Kauffman family and their son Edgar Jr. up until 1963 when they ultimately donated it to the Pennsylvania Conservancy. Frank Lloyd Wright was famous for bringing the outdoors in with his architecture, but the Fallingwater project was something that encompassed that relationship with nature unlike any other house that he designed before. What makes this Fallingwater house so special that's kind of hard to articulate in a video like this is a combination of the boldness of the architect who designed it, the innovation of the house itself, and then of course the landscape that the house sits on. Fallingwater is broken up into 3 floors, with the first level which includes a big living room, a kitchen, a couple of terraces, and a loggia outside of the entry. Floor 2 features another terrace, a dressing room, a master bedroom, and a guest room because I guess Edgar Kauffman's wife needed a second bedroom. And then floor 3 is the smallest of the levels. It just has a study and the bedroom of the Kauffman's son, Edgar Jr. I should mention here too that there's also a small 1,000 square foot guest house that sits on the site as well that you can see here on this site map, but the main house is definitely the main attraction. In total, the Fallingwater main house encompasses about 9,300 square feet of space, but about 4,400 square feet of that space is the outdoor terraces, so that means about half of the living space is outside. Since this place is basically a museum, there's not a whole lot out there as far as interior photos go, but I dug up some shots from this website called Living Etc., so we should talk through some of these together just to give you guys a feel of what's inside. So here's a cool shot that you don't see all that often of the house. You can see this is actually a staircase that comes down from the main living area with a little platform that actually connects you right to the water, which is pretty cool. This next shot just shows a close-up of some of that window detail. Each one of these corner windows actually individually opens up, which is really nice. You can get some fresh air into the house that way. But you can see here too that's pretty deteriorated in this shot on the stucco. Definitely could use a repaint. Here's inside the house of the main living area. You see there's this kind of flagstone material on the floor and then some built-in furniture, which Frank Lloyd Wright was responsible for. Here's another perspective that just shows kind of how this house is furnished, which is a little bit unusual, but pretty cool. You gotta remember, this stuff's like 100 years old. And the last shot they share here is of a swimming pool that's actually attached to the side of the property. Another feature that's pretty amazing and forward-thinking for a house this old. It actually gets pretty hot in this region of Pennsylvania in the summer, so this swimming pool would get a lot of use. I wish that I could give you guys more as far as the interiors of the house goes, but I guess you're gonna have to fly out to Pennsylvania and see it for yourself if you wanna see more. As far as cost goes, they estimated that the building would cost about $35,000 all in, but it ended up costing about $150,000, which that did include the main house, the guest house, and the furniture. If you do the calculation to make the adjustment for inflation, $150,000 in 1935 is the equivalent of about $3 million today. Nowadays, the Fallingwater house is almost guaranteed to be relevant until the end of time because ever since the Kauffman family donated it, it has been a well-maintained attraction since. This region of Pennsylvania is a tough climate, so the house is exposed to pretty extreme humid heat and cold temperatures, and because of that, it's kind of always in a constant state of deterioration. The good news is that tens of millions of dollars have been dumped into this house over the years, just maintaining and restoring and reinforcing the house. So nowadays, Fallingwater stands even stronger than when it was originally built. Fallingwater is a major tourist destination with around 150,000 people from all over the world visiting there every year. And as a visitor, you have an option to book a tour ranging from $15, which just allows you to walk the grounds, to $32, which gives you a guided architectural tour, or you can spend $1,500 if you really want to go crazy and get a private tour that includes a meal. I had the opportunity to tour this amazing house back in 2016 with my mom. We chose to do the $32 option. I look back in my phone and I cannot believe that the only photo I have from this visit is this classic shot from pretty much the exact same vantage point that everybody else takes pictures from. But I'll just say that as a lover of history and modern architecture, visiting this house was absolutely one of the coolest experiences I've had in my life. Frank Lloyd Wright's life ended unexpectedly after being stricken with an illness that left him hospitalized, passing away on April 9th, 1959 at the age of 89. His legacy lives on though through buildings like you see behind me and like we looked at the start of the video, plus through the estimated 75 organizations across the country dedicated to Wright, along with his School of Architecture in Taliesin, founded in 1932, and the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation, founded in 1940. Wright devoted his life to promoting architecture as an extension of nature, and he believed that every man, woman, and child had the right to live a beautiful life in beautiful circumstances. Nowadays, it's estimated that around 400 projects of Frank Lloyd Wright's still remain standing to this day, many of which are private residences, and it's up to individuals like us to respect his work and ensure that it stands for the next 100 years so that others can continue to be inspired by the greatest American architect of all time. If you enjoyed today's episode, or if you enjoy Frank Lloyd Wright's work as much as I do, hit that like button down below before you go. And guys, remember to click subscribe as well if you're not already a subscriber. I'm putting new videos just like this one out every week, but that's all I've got for you this time. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, see ya!